All right, stand here. We're gonna make sure we got you in the camera angle. Don't worry. Hey, listen, y'all. Don't worry about looking at the camera. We're just making sure that the camera's the right height. You're gonna look at the judge.
Oh, height.
Yeah.
We're good.
All right.
Let me check this out.
John, let me check you too.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right, cool. You can go back. Yep.
Yeah, I guess you must have it next week.
Yeah, no, I'm working through the movie.
Oh, man, you took that.
Yeah. They said it worked very well.
Well, that's good. That's awesome.
I don't know, it's real energy. Yeah.
Well, I was just saying that.
Honestly,
So
I
you
might
were
have
on the
something
corner?
like.
Oh, yeah.
Call Sissy.
Calling Sissy. Home.
Call my husband, whom I love, Red Heart.
Calling my husband, whom I love. Mobile.
Hey, what are you doing? Oh, okay. Are you on this Zoom meeting? Well, there's something at the top that says talking Joel Slocum. It says meeting topic Lauren James's personal meeting room.
Hey, can you hear me?
Hey, Macy, can you hear us? Macy.
She's not in the hall. Do you want me to get her?
Testing audio. I think, can you hear us? All right, congratulations and welcome to the closing argument finals for the 2021 season. 83 people started this journey. 56 were on Sunday. After 5 grueling rounds, we are down to 2. We have John Flowers, please welcome, who hails from Columbus, Georgia. And we have from Churchport, Louisiana, representing the defendant, Isaiah Davis. They had 2 great rounds last night with guest judges. In just a moment, they're going to talk to you about the case in the state of Mercer. Ironically, today is opening day. It is a civil case between Dancy Swanson and Tim Taylor. Soon, they will argue, and the evidence has already been presented, about Mr. Swanson. In his baseball career at Mercer, Mr. Swanson suffered a dog bite from Mr. Taylor's dog. And the question is going to be, and the verdict will be soon, as to whether or not it was Mr. Taylor's negligence or Mr. Swanson's comparative negligence. We look forward to delivering a verdict, gentlemen, and welcome. In the meantime, I will turn it over to one of our lovely competition coordinators in just a moment. Please also welcome Dean Cox as our special guest. Virginia Josie is one of our evaluators. Judge Bonnie Smith will be presiding and evaluating. Your timekeeper will be Ms. Lauren James. She will handle those time cards in the same manner that's been going on all week. And so with that, we'll get started.
All right. Court is now in session for the 6th Circuit in the state of Mercer. Our presiding judge is the Honorable Bonnie Smith. Thank you. You may be seated.
We have reached the point in this trial of Dancy Swanson versus Tim Taylor where it's time for both parties to proceed with their closing argument. Is the plaintiff ready to proceed? Yes, sir. Is the defense ready to proceed?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, y'all may proceed.
Your Honor, I would like to reserve 1 minute of my time for rebuttal, please.
Okay.
May it please the court, opposing counsel, members of the jury. Man's best friend has become another man's worst enemy. And when a violent attack happens in an instant, we must bring legal action against the defendant. In this case today, Mr. Swanson's actions were entirely insufficient to provoke Apollo, and thus Apollo's ensuing violence was unjustified. Mr. Taylor negligently maintained and improperly secured his front gate, and this allowed the attack to happen, and it allowed the plaintiff, Mr. Swanson, to suffer serious damages. Ultimately, Mr. Taylor, the defendant, should be held liable for this negligence, and my client should collect the compensation that he deserves. And this, members of the jury, is a negligence action before you today. As such, I, as plaintiff's counsel, am obligated to prove duty, breach, causation, and damages. And specifically, what I must prove is that Mr. Taylor had a pre-existing duty to Mr. Swanson, that Mr. Taylor breached his duty, that this breach was the proximate cause of Mr. Swanson's injuries, and that Mr. Swanson did, in fact, sustain injuries and damages. Now, I will prove these elements today by a preponderance of the evidence. And members of the jury, think of this standard, as if you will, as a more likely than not standard. Or if you prefer, I can illustrate it for you. Imagine, if you will, a grand adversarial game of tug of war, in which I, the plaintiff's counsel, am firmly gripping one end of the rope and pulling, and then on the other end of the rope is defense counsel and the defendant, Mr. Taylor, and they're pulling. And directly fixed to the center, demarking the middle of this rope, is a red flag. Now, when you find today that you see the facts and the evidence in light that I do, and I'm able to pull that flag across the center line clearly in my direction, then you are obligated to rule in my favor, and you will find my client, Mr. Swanson, with the compensation that he deserves. And you will find the defendant, Mr. Taylor, liable for his negligence. Now, before that happens, opposing counsel will rise momentarily, and he will make a number of baseless allegations designed to discredit the testimony and denigrate the character of the plaintiff, Mr. Dansby Swanson. He will make claims such as that Mr. Swanson is a fiery hothead with a raging temper. He will say that the plaintiff is comparatively negligent. He'll accuse him of being an animal abuser who intentionally threw the baseball for the purpose of striking the dog Apollo. And he'll say that the baseball did in fact hit Apollo. He'll say that Mr. Taylor's gate was not negligently maintained and that it was up to code in the Turner neighborhood on the date of injury. Ultimately, he will say that the defendant, Tim Taylor, is not liable for his negligence. The facts and the evidence in this case suggest otherwise. And as I showed to you today, I will disprove and rebut each and every one of these baseless allegations. So, first, Mr. Swanson's actions on July 24, 2020 were not sufficient to provoke Apollo in a manner that would justify Apollo's reaction. In such, Apollo's reaction in the ensuing violence was entirely unjustified. Members of the jury, what do you know about the events that transpired on July 24, 2020? You know that Mr. Swanson and his good friend, Mr. Freed, were walking to the park to throw a game of baseball. And prior to that, they stopped by the defendant's house, as they always did as a part of their game day ritual and tradition. And they wanted to pet the dog Apollo for good luck. And on that day in particular, on July 24, 2020, Apollo was basking and lounging in the sun on the porch. And so in order to get his attention, Mr. Taylor lightly tossed the baseball into the defendant's yard. He did not throw the baseball for the purpose of striking Apollo, and he did not, in fact, strike Apollo with the baseball. Mr. Swanson had goodwill and not ill will towards Apollo. He wanted the dog to come over so that he could scratch him and give him a pet, as he did every game day. However, when he lightly threw the ball into the yard, Apollo reacted violently, burst through the gate, and latched himself onto the plaintiff's arms, causing the plaintiff severe injuries. This attack was unprovoked. Mr. Swanson's actions did not provoke Apollo's violent response. Secondly, Mr. Taylor, the defendant's gate, was negligently maintained and improperly secured on July 24, 2020. Now, there is differing testimony between the plaintiff and the defendant regarding the state of the gate on that day. The plaintiff, Mr. Swanson, says that the gate was slightly ajar and open. The defendant, Mr. Taylor, says that it was closed. Members of the jury, even if you want to take the defendant's word for it and assume that the gate was closed on that day, this gate is still improperly secured. Now, you remember Exhibit 4, however, study it carefully this time. Look at this historic wrought iron gate and allow me to elaborate why it's improperly secured. On this gate, there is a C-shaped bracket set at about hip height, fixed on the immovable part of the fencing. On the free swinging part of the gate that is movable, there is a tension bar, and when the two align, the tension bar falls into place and secures itself in the bracket, closing the gate. However, what's problematic about this is that all that it takes is the slightest amount of pressure, and that tension bar unfixes itself from the bracket, and the gate can come swinging over. So all Apollo, the big large dog, needs to do is waltz up to that gate, press his snout or push his body weight into that tension bar. It unfixes itself from that bracket, and the gate swings freely over. This is the defendant's breach of duty. He allowed his big large dog with a history of past aggression to have a gate that allowed him to get out at will. And as such, he breached his duty. Now, we should look at this breach in light of the ordinary care standard. The ordinary care standard says that we should view his conduct through the lens of what a reasonable and prudent person would do in the circumstances. And the circumstances of the defendants that we should look at is the fact that the defendant is a home improvement show host. Meaning he goes to work every day, he gets in front of a camera and hosts a home improvement show. And he has a background that's blue collar and kind of works with your hands. And he's familiar with home improvement projects and processes and materials. He knows about fencing and gates and gate hardware. Imagine the reasonable and prudent home improvement show host as somebody akin to Mike Rowe of the show Dirty Jobs or Chip and Joanna Gaines of the show Fixer Upper. If these reasonable and prudent home improvement show hosts looked at that gate and then looked at the large dog Apollo, they would know immediately that that gate is entirely insufficient for the purpose of keeping in a large dog. Why then, members of the jury, did the defendant not know this? This makes his breach of duty especially egregious. And his improper security of this gate allowed Apollo to escape and attack the hunter. Next, members of the jury, think long and hard before you consider and trust the testimony of the defense's witness, Mr. Wilson. Because there are a few things that you should know about Mr. Wilson. And first, we know that Mr. Wilson has enjoyed a long-standing relationship with Mr. Taylor, the defendant, and that he and Mr. Taylor are, quote, good friends and have been good friends for a decade. Now, his testimony is biased. He helped Mr. Taylor get Apollo. He cannot be trusted. Members of the jury, in this case, a man's best friend became another man's worst enemy. And because this attack happened in an instant, we now feel justified in bringing legal action against this defendant. We have proven each and every element in the evidence today. Find the defendant, Mr. Taylor, liable for his negligence.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury. Peaceful until provoked. On July 24th of 2020, Apollo, Mr. Taylor's dog, was peacefully sunbathing on the front porch of his home. That was until the plaintiff provoked him to attack by throwing a baseball at him. Now, you might recognize Mr. Taylor from a TV show called Tool Time. And when he's not on air giving out tips and tricks on home improvement, he's at home with his best friend. And his best friend just so happened to be the dog named Apollo. Now, why is he best friends with a dog? Well, because he has everything that you want out of a best friend. He's loyal, he's friendly, above all else, he's peaceful. In fact, you heard today from the plaintiff that he was able to pet Apollo on multiple occasions without incident until July 24th, 2020. If you remember Mr. Taylor's testimony today, he told you that July 24th, 2020 was a beautiful day. And what better way to spend it than go outside and have lunch with your best friend? So what did he do? He let Apollo out on the front porch. He finished making lunch. Now you heard today from Mr. Taylor's neighbor, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Wilson told you that while they were outside, or while Apollo was outside, he was gardening. He was listening to music. He looked up and he saw two people walk up to the fence that surrounded Mr. Taylor's front yard. Those two people were the plaintiff and his friend. So Mr. Wilson turned off his music just in time to hear the plaintiff call out to Apollo. And he saw that Apollo didn't respond. And Mr. Wilson told you that he noticed that the plaintiff got pretty mad. He told you that he heard the plaintiff say something about ruining a game day tradition. So he watched the plaintiff cock his arm back with a baseball in it, launch it across the front yard, across the fence, and hit Apollo. Now remember, the plaintiff is a college baseball player. So when he threw this baseball, it was with accuracy and it was with force. If you remember from Mr. Taylor's testimony, he brought Apollo to the vet. And when he brought him to the vet, he found out that Apollo suffered a bruised bone. Not a superficial bruise that you get when you fall and scrape your knee. A bruised bone. Now, if you remember exactly what happened after he threw this ball and hit Apollo with the ball, we talked about an owner's manual, Mr. Taylor. And what happened next is perfectly characterized in this very last sentence. It says here, now Dobermans, like Apollo, are semi-friendly to strangers unless provoked. So after he was hit with this baseball, Apollo did what all Dobermans do. He got up and he bit the plaintiff. And the plaintiff wants you to believe that somehow, some way, this is all Mr. Taylor's fault. In fact, closing counsel stood on closing argument and told you this is all Mr. Taylor's fault. He should have had the gate locked. But they couldn't just tell you that, could they? They have to prove it to you. The plaintiff carries a burden of proof, and only they carry this burden. They have to prove to you by a preponderance of the evidence that Mr. Taylor was negligent on July 24th, 2020. Now, preponderance of evidence is not like a tug of war, because we're not fighting back with the plaintiff. The plaintiff has to do all the work by themselves. It's more like this. Imagine there's a mountain, and you, the jury, are on one side, and the plaintiff is on the other. They can't just climb to the peak and expect you to meet them halfway. They have to climb to the peak and then some. They have to prove to you that it's more likely than not that the defendant, Mr. Taylor, was negligent on July 24th, 2020. This is a steep mountain to climb because they have to prove to you duty, breach, causation, and damages. Meaning they have to prove to you that number one, Mr. Taylor had a duty to prevent this attack from happening. Number two, that he breached that duty. Number three, that his breach of duty was the proximate cause of this attack. And number four, as a result of this attack, the plaintiff suffered injuries. But they can't do that. Why? Because the reason why Apollo attacked in the first place was because the plaintiff provoked an otherwise peaceful animal. The plaintiff was comparatively negligent. And all that means is this. If you find that the plaintiff threw the ball at Apollo, and that he hit Apollo with the ball, and that this caused Apollo to attack, then your verdict has to be in favor of Mr. Taylor and find him not liable. Now, we the defense, we don't have a burden in this case. We never did. But I'll confess, we did prove something to you. We proved to you that the plaintiff was comparatively negligent. And not just with our witnesses and our evidence and our testimony, but with opposing witnesses as well. You heard from the plaintiff's friend and his teammate. The plaintiff has a history of violent temper tantrums. If you remember Max Fry, he got on the stand and he told you that typically on their game days, they eat breakfast at a specific restaurant. And there was one time where they decided to eat somewhere else. The plaintiff got so angry that he grabbed the baseball bat and he broke a mailbox. So it makes sense. It makes sense that when the plaintiff told you that his game day tradition on July 24, 2020 was to pet the Apollo, and that was why he was there in the first place. That was why he called out to Apollo. The plaintiff told you that he got angry, he got mad. It made him mad that Apollo didn't respond. The plaintiff told you that when Apollo didn't respond, he decided to pick up a baseball and send it over the fence. That's what the plaintiff told you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, opposing counsel going to stand up here in a bit. They're going to try and tell you a story. They're going to try and tell you that man's best friend became man's worst nightmare. Let's really look at this story. Because what exactly happened? Who was the nightmare in this scenario? Was it the peaceful Doberman sunbathing on the front porch? Or was it the athlete that cared so much about his game day traditions that he was willing to injure another animal? He was willing to throw a baseball at. Was it the peaceful Doberman that has no history of attacking anyone? Or was it the athlete that has a history of throwing temper tantrums? They made a big deal about this gate. Where's the fine for this gate not being properly closed? We never heard that. They talked about Chip and Joanna Gaines will tell you all about it. We didn't hear from them. They didn't testify to it. You can only base your verdict on what the evidence showed you. The evidence showed you that Apollo was peaceful until provoked. And as a result, we ask that you find Mr. Taylor not liable for the plaintiff's injuries. Thank you.
Does the plaintiff wish to use the remaining time for rebuttal?
Members of the jury, as I predicted, opposing counsel has stood before you today and made a number of baseless allegations designed entirely to denigrate the character and discredit the testimony of Mr. Swanson. Opposing counsel has relied heavily on the testimony of Mr. Wilson. However, it has already been discredited. He is much too close to the defendant in this case, and he cannot be trusted. Furthermore, just because the plaintiff destroyed an inanimate object in the past does not mean he would harm a living, breathing creature. Members of the jury, we ask that you find the defendant liable for his negligence. Thank you.
You let me clap.
Yes.
This program is obviously has a right future ahead of it. You have this kind of quality candidate who's going to be on any of these advocacy teams. That was amazing from both sides, and congratulate yourself for being star number one, and also for tonight's performance. That was worth my drive. That was awesome. So I appreciate all the work that you have clearly put into this. It's very hard to stand up on your feet with people staring at you when there's a camera right in your face, and I thought y'all both did a great job. So thank you for letting me come. Hey, Professor Powers, whatever I'm supposed to call you now. But y'all are in good hands, and you're going to both be excellent lawyers and excellent additions to an advocacy, no doubt.
Virginia?
I was just shocked that this is your first year. I mean, really, this is incredible. Both of you were outstanding. There was so much, your presence, the two of you, just was overwhelming. And I just can't believe that this is just the start of your future mock trial. It was incredible. Good job.
It was just awesome. I don't have anything else to say. We're going to score. While we score, let's also give a big round of applause to not only our mock trial board, but two specific people who have made this run seamlessly, Lauren James and Macelyne Williams. So, we are certainly welcome to step out and go somewhere if that would make you feel. Yeah. Yeah, but your math is probably needs to be.
Okay, I'd like to add my congratulations, both of our finalists. On top of what our judges said, amazing, very proud of what you've done. And to think of all of you who have competed, I hope you're proud of what you've learned and how well you all performed, and the skills that you're coming out of this field are really incredible. Thank you to our judges for taking the time to be with us tonight, and throughout the process of helping our students prepare for tonight. But I have a winner, and our winner of the 2021 closing argument contest is Isaiah.
All right, you know, we need pictures for the website and the Facebook page, so if we can do a couple of those. The rest of you can just everybody get in.